This is Dr. Peter Swanz with Vital Force Naturopathy and drswanz.com. And I want to talk a little bit about the idea that's been a continual narrative around the COVID-19 infection, that this is a virus that is spread asymptomatically. This was first mentioned by Anthony Fauci, and he was referencing an article that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, and it was a reprint of an article from Germany. And what happened in Germany was a Chinese woman had traveled to Germany for a business meeting, and she went, attended this meeting with some German co-workers. She left, flew back home to China, and the German people that she met with developed the COVID-19 infection. The German health department came and talked to them. They asked them if she seemed sick, and they said no, she seemed fine. They wrote an article about it, suggesting that this was asymptomatic transmission. That article got republished in the US, and that's what Anthony Fauci was originally quoting about the idea of asymptomatic transmission. Now, the German health department went back, tracked down the woman from China who was the original patient zero in this story, and asked, hey, everyone said you seemed fine that day. Were you fine? And she said, absolutely not. I felt horrible, fever, aches, had to take ibuprofen, which effectively masked her symptoms. And that's why they thought she was asymptomatic. So the very first instance where we mentioned asymptomatic transmission was not demonstrating asymptomatic transmission at all. There's another story that I think is very interesting from China, and it's a presumed asymptomatic carrier. And this was a 20-year-old female who had been traveling and was coming back through Wuhan. In China, anybody that had traveled to or from Wuhan was considered to be a zero patient, or the original carrier patient, if they had come from that area. So listen what happened. This patient came through on a bus, was traveling back, had to stop there, then came home. The next day went with 4 family members. This individual, zero, is completely asymptomatic. Met with 4 family members the next day, and then they went to the hospital to visit other people that they knew that were sick. Within about a week, the family members started to develop symptoms, right? The patient zero, the original daughter, the 20-year-old who traveled into town, had not yet had any symptoms. 19 days after she returned, the 20-year-old tested positive and started to have symptoms of the COVID-19 infection. So the assumption was that she had it and was asymptomatic when she came back, gave it to her family, and then 19 days later, which is well past the 95% mark when we know patients will develop symptoms, if they're going to develop symptoms, that's 11 and a half days. Most patients develop symptoms between days 4 and 5. They then saw her develop things 19 days later. I think this may be where they also then started this rumor that people can get a secondary infection here, because they're assuming, one, she had one, she didn't, and then they're seeing her actually develop the infection and saying she recaught it. So this is not an example of asymptomatic transmission. There's so many other much more feasible possibilities of what happened. They went to the hospital. The whole family could have been exposed to something at the hospital. That makes much more sense than an asymptomatic 20-year-old passing it to the family and then developing symptoms 19 days later. The last study I want to mention, and I'm going to reference all of these in the comments, was looking at an asymptomatic individual who tested positive, asymptomatic, no symptoms, and had 455 contacts, 455 individual contacts. Most of these contacts were between 4 and 5 days long, right? So through work, through family. Of those 455 contacts, zero tested positive for the SARS-CoV-19 infection by the nucleic acid test. 0 out of 455. What this means to me is we need to be looking much more diligently at the numbers and the data that's coming in about the possibility of asymptomatic transmission. That storyline, that narrative has been continuous for as long as we've been talking about this. And that was extremely scary to me when the first 2 weeks of quarantine. I was wearing a mask when nobody was required to wear a mask because I thought, wow, if this is being spread asymptomatically, we have to protect ourselves. I'm concerned now that this disease has not had a pattern of transmission and a pattern of infection that indicates it's being passed asymptomatically. It just hasn't done that, right? And so if we're going to continue to use that narrative, we need to look more at the data. We need to have studies more in depth exploring this and not be basing it on misinformation from early in the epidemic, early in the pandemic, and then using that to really dictate policy now. If it's not being spread asymptomatically and you don't have any symptoms, it's irrelevant if you wear a mask. If it's not being spread asymptomatically and you have a mask on, you're not doing anything to help anybody because there's nothing to spread. And so I just feel like, people have been really hard, one way or the other. It's become politicized, which is silly to me, about the mask wearing. It's not a political issue. It's either effective or it's not. And there's been a lot of studies looking at masks. The N95 masks can decrease transmission. The cloth masks, the research is there. They do almost nothing. And if asymptomatically we're not passing it around anyway, it's kind of irrelevant to wear them. I do think if you have any symptoms of illness at all, because we do know with this virus, the symptoms don't always present with a cough and a fever, right? It's not just that typical upper respiratory stuff. Some people have had GI things. So if you're having any kind of symptoms and you're going outside, wear a mask. Really, you should stay home if you're feeling sick. But if you have to go out, wear a mask. That's a way you can help protect people. If you take ibuprofen or Tylenol on a daily basis for muscle aches or back pain or headaches, you should probably wear a mask when you go out because you might have symptoms and then be covering those up with those NSAIDs, and that could be problematic. But in general, we need to question more whether or not this is being spread by people who have no symptoms. It doesn't appear to be. And we need to stop creating policy or judging others based on this silly information. I've had people say to me, well, just wear a mask. It's the least you can do. That seems silly to me because the least you can do should be the least effective thing that you can do to help. And if we're not spreading this asymptomatically, it's irrelevant. You could wear a purple shirt. That would be the least thing you could do to not spread the disease. And you could be mad at people that weren't wearing purple shirts. We do know, and we've seen this in many studies with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of patients and hundreds of deaths from this illness, vitamin D is strongly correlated with the prognosis and the morbidity and mortality rates. The least we can do is be taking some vitamin D. The least we can do is give some vitamin D to our friends and families that are high-risk patients. That's, in my mind, the least we can do. So that's what I wanted to share. I appreciate you watching this video. I'm going to do one talking more about the specific research, and I'm going to reference each of the different articles and just talk about why I have problems with some of these conclusions. It's a little bonkers to me how many studies, legit published medical studies, say, oh, asymptomatic transmission is established or is known. And then they're referencing this original study with the woman going to Germany and saying that proved it. That's been debunked. There's been a correction published in Germany and in the US, yet we're still using that original study as a basis for misinformation, and then other scientific journals are publishing it and saying that that's the case, and it just doesn't make any sense. We need to do better. This has been a test for all of us here in America, and I think this is the kind of test where you need to show your work, right? And even if it's being spread asymptomatically, we don't have the science to show it, but we've had enough cases, we've had enough numbers. We need people looking at this and analyzing this and trying to track down, is this being spread asymptomatically? It doesn't look like it is. And so it's silly to continue to say that, and it's causing more harm than it is protecting, and we're missing opportunities to actually protect people. Vitamin D, sick people wearing masks, sick people staying home. If you have high comorbidity, elderly people, definitely wear masks. But the idea that young, healthy, asymptomatic people are spreading this around that's not what's being demonstrated at all. And it's fair for us to question that. It's not political, it's not personal, it's just a reasonable thing to ask. So the references that I talked about will be in this comments. I appreciate you watching this. My name is Dr. Peter Swanz. You can check me out, drswanz.com/connect, SWANZ. I hope you're having a peaceful, beautiful, great week. Peace.